Good morning and welcome to Peace Out, where we are all learning together to peace out, right? Aren't we just learning to trust Him more and more every single day with all the stuff on our plate? I mean, there's always something new, right? We never get to the end of it and go, okay, well, I've trusted Him with everything, and now we can just cruise through the rest of life. Nah, it doesn't work that way because as soon as you trust Him with all of these things, there'll be something else, which is just part of life, right? There's always something else coming up. There's always something. That's a good thing because we wouldn't want to be stagnant or stale. That's definitely busy is better, right? Too busy might not be. Anyway, but we're always just trusting Him with more. Hey, you're looking at the cover of Commander Morning, the book I just finished it this week. So I'm still proofreading it, and then it will be available, and I will definitely let you know. Make sure you check my author page because that's where I'll probably post most of I'll post it on my regular page too, but I'll be posting more details on my author page. It's just Jeannie Olinger author. That's just all it is right there, right? Anyway, follow that page and you'll get all the updates and you'll know exactly the second, because I'm so excited. I don't care if it's 2 or 3 in the morning. I get so excited when I post that book and it's up there. And it takes a few days for Amazon to catch up, but it'll be available in ebook on Buy Me a Coffee / Jeannie Olinger, which the funds that come through that go all towards Pakistan and paying for the printing in Pakistan. But anyway, which is another whole story that's really cool. I would have never guessed I'd have been here. I never guessed that I'd have been an international author with a book with books on the other side of the world, but God had it in His heart a long time ago. I'm so glad He shared it with me. I'm so glad I followed too. Anyway, and I'm so glad you guys follow along too. So we're looking at miracles that happened in the Old Testament and the New Testament this week. So I picked one for today, and I'm saving one for tomorrow. I can't wait to get to tomorrow, but we got to get through today first, right? And so I thought of this one. I was looking at, because I was reading some of the stories of Elisha and Elijah. That's kind of or Elijah and Elisha. And that's kind of where I got this idea. I was like, all of these that I'm reading with Elisha, that's what I was reading at the time, are things Jesus did too, right? Or the disciples did in Acts. I mean, the breaking of the bread and feeding lots of people with very little food, all these different things. I'm like, there wasn't that much. God didn't change between the Old Testament and the New Testament. How we accessed Him and how He lives in us is what changed with Jesus going to the cross. But God's the same God. He still does miracles on either side of the cross. He still heals, whether we get healed or not. He still heals. He still saves. He still wants to have a relationship with us. And that's what's amazing to me. Anyway, so the one I wanted to talk about today, in 1 Kings chapter 11, there is a story about Elijah, who was the predecessor. Predecessor? Is that the way you say it? He preceded Elisha. Elisha was his son in the Lord, so to speak, and he raised him up. And they were both prophets, considered major prophets in the Old Testament, really. And so Elijah, a widow had a son who died, and she came and said, she came to him and said, my son has died, and he went and raised her son from the dead. Well, we have a similar story in 2 Kings. We're still in chapter 4. I guess that's where we were yesterday. The Shunammite's son. Remember, I believe we talked about this yesterday, where she didn't have any children, and so she said his prayer was this: what can I do for her, because she's been such a blessing in my life. And Gehazi said she doesn't have a child, and so he said, oh, next year this time you're going to hold a son. And she said, a baby in your arms. And she said, stop, don't tease me. I've given up on that hope, right? I gave up on, hey, come back here. I've given up on that hope. And so she had a baby, a miracle baby, and now he's grown to probably his teen years, and he died. And she came to Elisha and said, he said, what's wrong? He could tell she was in grief. She had lost her son, and they said, stand up and all that. He was like, no, she's very grieved. And then the story came out that her son was dead. So he sent Gehazi ahead, and then he went and he laid on the son. I guess Gehazi laid his rod on him, Elisha's rod on him first, and nothing happened. He didn't get up. And so Elisha came and prayed for him, walked back and forth in the house, it said, and then he prayed for him, and God raised him up. That's amazing in itself, right? It's like, wow, that's twice in the Old Testament. And that's just two stories. I've got another one in my mind where when they buried Elisha, because Elijah went up in the cloud, right? So it had to be Elisha. They had buried him in a tomb, and there was a battle going on, and somebody got killed, and so they tossed him in Elisha's grave, and he came back to life. So that's three in the Old Testament, right? And so I'm like, that's Old Testament. God did it in the Old Testament. Surely he can do it in the New Testament. Well, he did. So let's see. In Mark, let's see, where am I? Mark, I don't see which chapter it is, but there was a story where Jesus went and healed a girl was here it goes. Mark 5:35. It says there was a daughter who was dead, and Jesus went and healed her. He said she's just sleeping, and they were like, right? He doesn't even know the difference between dead and sleeping, gone or here. And he went in and healed her and raised her from the dead. And then we have the story of Lazarus in John 11, and a great story. And I think what stands out to me in this story, and I don't want to get off on just that really, but Mary and Martha told Jesus, if you had been here, excuse me, if you had been here, our brother wouldn't have died. They were in such a state of grief and sadness and sorrow. And they were like, if you had been here, because he's in the tomb, he's buried. And back then they didn't have embalming like we have now. And so he was stanky, right? And so they were like, if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. And I was listening to a sermon. I can't say the lady's name because it's a really weird name, but her first name was Janice. And she was mentioned this in the sermon, and she mentioned going to that place where God disappointed you. And it was when I was listening to that sermon that I realized I myself was disappointed with God because he had allowed this to happen to Chris. I was just being honest. But when I got to that place where I went, oh, I'm disappointed because God allowed it. He didn't stop it. He didn't prevent it, right? And so when I was able to come to that, and I remember just literally laying on the floor and crying and realizing, God, I'm just disappointed that you didn't answer my prayer like I thought. You didn't prevent this from happening. Life didn't turn out like I thought. I thought I had lost everything. And in that moment is when he speaks life into what was dead, right? So Lazarus is dead, and Mary and Martha are like, man, if you had just been here, why weren't you here? We needed you. Have you ever felt like that? Has there ever been a moment in your life, and maybe you're in one right now, where you're like, God, if you could just be here, it would be so much better. I feel like you didn't answer the prayer I prayed, or I didn't get the answer I wanted, and then you go to Psalm 13. Are you even listening? Are you still there? How long are you going to look the other way? Are you really there, Lord? How long will I have this grief, this sorrow in my heart? Are you listening to me, God? Did you not hear my prayer? And God says, you know what? Even in your moments of great disappointment, even in your moments of great sadness, even in your moments of loss, of sorrow, of grief, of things you don't understand, God can breathe life into them. And he goes to Lazarus. He says, roll the stone away. They're like, are you kidding me? He's been dead 4 days and he's going to stink. And he said, Lazarus, get up. And Lazarus came back to life, right? And God can breathe life into our circumstances. He can breathe life into our situations, no matter how far gone we think they are, and that's what becomes a testimony, right? It's those lowest moments in our lives that when we look back and go, God did breathe life in that. God brought something good out of that. God moved in me in that situation. He worked in that situation. I still trust him. And sometimes that's the greatest miracle. We continue to trust him even when there's hard times, even when there's difficult things, even in loss, sorrow, grief, fill in the blank, hurting, pain, fill in the blank with whatever you have on your plate right now. God is still going to breathe life into you. He doesn't say, well, I'm not. He could have looked at Mary and Martha and gone, well, you can talk to me like that. I'm not. Well, you're just stuck. They'd have never known the resurrection power. Jesus even told Martha, I am the resurrection. Don't look for it somewhere else. I am the resurrection. And he proved that because He got up in 3 days, right? So he raised himself from the Spirit of God raised him from the dead. Death could not hold him. And I love that. And you know what's really cool about that? And I don't want to get off on it. Here I go, right? Romans 8:11 says the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead lives inside of you. Now that'll blow your pea-picking brain, right? That blows my mind that the same Spirit that got Jesus up out of the grave, that brought Lazarus back from the dead, that brought the child back for the leader, that brought the sons back for the widow, the Shunammite woman in the Old Testament, that same powerful Spirit lives inside of us to quicken our spiritual being, to put the life of God inside of us. Isn't that awesome? I'm so glad I live in the New Testament and I understand some of those things. I don't get them fully. I don't know if I'll ever fully, completely be able to grasp it with this little finite mind of mine, right? That stretches just to go, wow, God did that? Yeah, he did. And he'll do it for us. Inside of us, every single day, he will breathe his life and put his life inside what feels like it's dead, but it's not, because we have the life of God. We have the peace of God. And that's why we can peace out. We have the Spirit of God living inside of us. Think about that as you go about your day, how God lives. That same Spirit that said Lazarus come up, that same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead lives inside of every single believer. You could take that to the bank. Have a great day. Peace out. I'll see you again tomorrow.